everyone. Welcome to today's episode on policies and procedures for ESG integration. I would like to thank everyone for taking the time in joining us today. I am Simoni Rathod from Lodha and Company ESG Practice. Lodha and Company is one of the oldest audit and assurance firms with 6 offices all over the country. This is the third episode of the webinar series on ESG reporting by Indian corporates. Our first and the second episode was held on 9th and 16th December, where we discussed the foundation on which the business responsibility and sustainability report is laid on. We also understood the history of NGRBCs, on which the policies of the entities are to be framed. In today's episode, we will find out the various policies that are required under the BRSR report and how these policies are framed, as well as the best practices to ensure a positive BRSR reporting. The purpose of the webinar is purely for educational purposes. Any kind of compliance-related decisions shall be referred to the professional advisors. Attendees can access the recorded version of the webinar on our YouTube channel, the link of which is provided in the live chat box. In case of any clarifications, guidance on BRSR reporting, attendees can pose their questions in the live chat box, and we will be happy to address them after the session. Attendees are requested to stay on mute at all times during the session. The BRSR reporting is the new avatar to a legacy of other sustainable reports. While BRSR is a compliance mandate for top 1,000 listed entities, the filing exercise gives these entities a deeper insight on the non-financial business risk and opportunities. It requires a more profound engagement within the organization to be able to build a BRSR report. Entities should realize that the focus should not be just on the reporting part, but actually on the integration of the material, environmental, social, and governance factors into their business model. This will not only enable them to prepare a positive report, but also enable them to gain a competitive advantage and generate value for the entity in the long run. So when we speak about ESG integration, what it really means to integrate ESG across the business. So the alpha and omega of this is whether the company at the highest level of governance has decided to go for 100% integration or no. If yes, then the next step can be taken ahead. What is integration? It is basically considering environmental, social, and governance matters into your decision making. So first, the entities need to identify what are the environmental, social, and governance issues. To identify that, they need to conduct the exercise of materiality mapping. Once these issues are identified, these issues have to be addressed by the board and implemented. Various measures have to be implemented in the middle and the lower level management. The reporting has to be done to the stakeholders by giving them confidence on the credibility of the report using the assurance exercise. Another thing that the entities need to understand that every entity is unique. So the integration techniques that they will be using will be different for different entity, because it also depends on the sector that the entities are belonging to, the board composition that they have, the culture that the entities are having. So the integration technique will be different for different entities. One important reason why ESG integration is also important is because the investors are now in the year 2019, a report was issued by McKinsey where they have said that the investors are actually now paying attention to the ESG integration of the companies. And this is why if there is an improved ESG integration, it will help the entities to even get investments from the investors. Now I will pass on the virtual flow to Mr. Manishankar Prasad, who will take the conversation further. Mr. Manishankar Prasad comes with 14 years of experience in the environmental and social consulting field from across 10 countries in Asia and Africa. Currently, he is the Vice President of ESG Practice, Lodha and Company.
Hi, many thanks for the kind introduction and for the opening alap, uh, the beginning of the presentation, which is a really important anchor and a window into understanding policies and procedures within the ambit of BRSR. And BRSR is essentially ESG reporting within an Indian framework, make in India kind of a lens. So I would like to begin with drawing upon what Simone just mentioned, which is how do you integrate ESG across businesses, right? There is a very interesting article slash paper which has come out in the Stanford Social Innovation Review by Harold Ubalkate, who is an ESG advisor, who 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 talks upon the how and why of ESG integration within businesses actually. So when we talk about ESG integration, um, when you are affiliated to the PRI or the Principles of Responsible Investment, which is affiliated to the UN, uh, organizations who have an average market cap of $1.3 billion spend uh, a lot of money, and they have ESG teams who are at the scale of, on an average, 80 people to comply with ESG reporting and data requirements. And they often have a third party data provider who supports them on the information and actually the reporting side of the business. So it is an expensive exercise. So why are banks and financial institutions investing so much money into ESG integration? Because it's a need of the hour in terms of capital, in terms of market access, in terms of really being in sync with the times. And in order to understand what is really important and material for the business, and we again harp on, again we zoom in into the rather critical nomenclature of materiality over here. And what is material? Something which is essential to your business continuity of your business and smooth operation of your business is actually material to your business, right? So each integration techniques can be different and varied. ESG integration, popular ESG integration techniques can be further split into investments which are completely theme based, or are exclusion based, or based upon materiality, where you map the risk uh, and you actually calibrate and design a system which is bespoke to your operations and fundamental to the core of your business, rather than being a side or a peripheral exercise. So so there are various kinds of tools and techniques how to integrate the notion, the normative of ESG across your business operations. Uh, a popular technique is responsible investing, of course. It's about, of course, investing in asset classes which are completely green in nature, whether it is a startup which is into carbon storage and sequestration, or whether it is into investing into a company. Strategies might differ, and everything starts off with what is the compliance mandate. Companies who are in India, who are publicly listed within the top 1,000, have to file a BRSR report. BRSR has got 100 plus indicators, and there are already 70 odd companies who have done a voluntary BRSR in the past 2 years, which is incredible, in a sample size of about 1,000. And even beyond the 1,000 companies, there are a few outliers who have already done voluntary BRSR, which is a very encouraging sign. And some sectors, of course, are over-indexed than the others, but uh, but this kind of progress and traction and momentum is really valued, and and a very important step of the ESG integration process is doing your compliance and doing your compliance well. Of course, ESG. Let me add. Let me foreground in that in the Indian ESG context, it's not only environment or carbon. There's a lot of social. There's a lot of human rights. There's a lot of community. probably reflects the developmental realities of the country far more than others. And of course, in the last episode last week, which you can check it out on a YouTube channel, we have spoken in detail about NGRBC, the framework regarding responsible business. And when we talk about responsible, ESG is a part of the responsible and the impact thinking, Zyges framework, kind of an idea, right? So responsible is about how to involve your human capital, supply chains, and also your vendors and also your suppliers. So how do you do it? How do you add additional feet? How do you operationalize your normative thinking about ESG in your day-to-day operations? And BRSR is an exceptional window into that journey. So we will talk about a few policies and procedures which actually add legs and feet and adds ballast to your ship and wind to your sails in order for you to start thinking about integrating ESG through a very custom framework within India. And we will start off with a few policies and procedures in the next slide. Simone, if you can change. Okay, wonderful. So there are already mandatory policies uh, which are required by publicly listed companies, which they have to have authorized, ratified by the board as a part of the G, as a part of the E. For example, if you are filing your monitoring reports or your quarterly audit reports with the MOEF, or you're doing filings with the Ministry of Corporate Affairs regarding your compliance matters, your probably your company secretary does it, or your chief financial officer does it in the organization, which is very, very important. So you need to have grievance redressal mechanism, a whistleblower policy, a CSR policy under Article 135 of the Companies Act of 2013, for example. You need to have some specific policies which are mandated as a part of your compliance measures. These are very, very important. And under the SEBI regulations, you need to have a policy of materiality, for example. You need to have a policy for essentially disclosure, code of conduct. How do you actually deal with whistleblowers, for example? Very sensitive, but very needed as well. So how do you actually develop an equal opportunity policy, which is mapped, which is a requirement, right? Which is mapped to the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act of 2016, which is again cross-mapped to BRSR in terms of Principle 3 of Section C. How do you actually map anti-harassment policies, for example, which are mandatory? You need a policy for the prevention of sexual harassment in the workplace, very sensitive in the Me Too movement, right? Which we all had a couple of years back, and still it lurks in the shadows, as it says. And it's also very important that policies under various other acts are also present, right? In terms of legal identity, in terms of business operations, etc., etc. So it might be mapped to what are needed under the BRSR framework. And I would call it a framework because it is overarching thinking about responsible business as a whole, rather than only environment, which is Principle 6 under Section C of the report. And under BRSR, in Section A, which is predominantly about corporate governance, you have the grievance redressal policy, for example, over there. Or you have an anti-bribery policy under Principle 1 of Section C. So these are the kind of policies under BRSL which are mandatory, right? Human rights policy, a health and safety policy is a must, a sustainability policy, sustainable procurement. In the era of the digital, where we are all hyperlinked and hyperconnected, we need a data privacy policy, we need cybersecurity to protect it, especially for tech companies. or for B2C companies which deal with massive volumes of consumer data, for example, telecom companies, for example. Very, very important. Human rights is a very important part of the global zeitgeist on sustainability, right? Because human rights is a major component of BRSR, which is often overlooked. Uh, the S is massively embedded within BRSR. It's not only E, which follows the EU taxonomy very, very closely under the SFDR or the corporate sustainability reporting disclosure frameworks, which has been ratified by the EU Parliament, which is mandated for the top 500 European companies from next year onwards. So these are all the policies. We would like to take this up one by one and probably do a deep dive on it. So firstly is the anti-corruption and anti-bribery policy. Why is it important? Because corruption is, is a lived experience for many people. And so such activities which discourage competition, which undercut competition, should not be allowed. So the purpose should outline the procedures and policies which prevent any misconduct with regard to bribery, facilitation of payments, or corruption. We have seen many companies internationally which have been barred from vendor procurement, for example, across various supply chains for doing underhanded activities and actions. And so this policy should have the scope, it should have a governance structure in place, it should have a policy statement, the training plan. How do we actually investigate an event of corruption? What disciplinary action do we actually take? What is the reporting mechanism? Suppose we want to report an act of graft. How do you protect the whistleblower, which is so significant and so important in these situations which are risky? How do you review, and how do you actually clarify your stance regarding these policies? Corruption and anti-bribery is very, very important in many parts of the world and not only in India. Secondly, you have something called as a sustainable sourcing policy. Why sustainable and why sourcing? Most industries do have a lot of procurement from the supply chains. Either they take raw materials or they supply the products, and in lieu of the raw material after processing them, so a manufacturing process, so a production process. So how do you sustainably source the materials, for example? A good example that we see of sustainable sourcing is Unilever, IKEA, Walmart. All global supply chains have a sustainable sourcing policy to ensure business objectives are met while making a positive impact on the lives of communities and supply chains, at the same time reducing environmental impact as well. And also meet mandatory requirements like comply with laws, code of business conduct, employee health and safety, etc. And also follow requirements for reporting in case there are breaches in policy, and try to recommend or try to follow the recommendations of best practices for encouraging suppliers to actually follow these processes, and also to move up the value chain in terms of thinking towards from compliance to competitive advantage to consciousness. The next slide, please. As I mentioned, human rights is a very important part of BRSR, and it is in line with some of the EU taxonomy which is in place. So to ensure that human rights are upheld across operations and value chain. As a business and human rights specialist, I can definitely tell one thing, that human rights is political, it's controversial, and it's innovative in nature. So how do you actually embed, operationalize something which is normative and value-driven in nature? Actually, it's quite simple. You build it into policies, procedures, SOPs, protocols, and you build a culture of dignity and respect within the organization. So how do you actually do that? You articulate the vision, you clarify what are the principles of the human rights policy, you explicitly state equal opportunity, diversity, inclusion, and non-determination. And non-determination can vary for context to context, because various countries will have different cases of non-discrimination, for example. So how a person is discriminated against is also context specific, which would have to factor into your materiality analysis when you do it. But at the policy level, non-discrimination and diversity and inclusion and equal opportunity, and I will add one more layer to it, add dignity and respect to it as well. These are very important values to be embedded in your human rights policy. So why is it important? Because you prevent harassment. You articulate measures for freedom of associations in terms of worker committees, which are very common. In terms of compliance with labor standards, right? India has got four labor standards after condensing about 30 odd laws which were done in 2019, for example. You have the Industrial Relations Code of 2019. You have Health and Safety Code of 2019. So these are excellent benchmarks to cross-reference in your human rights policy, for example. Child labor, forced labor is unfortunately a reality in some industries. So these have to be taken care of. There's something called the right to privacy, especially into information and technology environments. There's local community engagement in case you're working for extractive industries, resource intensive industries, and of course, right to grievance redressal and development is super important. Grievance redressal mechanism is both an S issue and a G issue. So you will have interlinkages between grievance redressal mechanism, whistleblower policies in both buckets, in terms of human capital and in terms of compliance as an institutional as a whole. So the next important policy, which is on the radar, emergent, but I don't think so it's taken very seriously, is data privacy and risk related to cybersecurity nature. So a data privacy or cybersecurity or an IT policy, which used to be the case earlier, is to create effective technical and physical safeguards for the protection of information of consumers and employees and prevent unauthorized access of dissemination of personal information. For example, telecom providers often are suspect of leaking our numbers to third-party agencies, for example. There is a data protection law which has been under consultation during the pandemic, and it was introduced in Parliament but withdrawn due to data sovereignty issues and the other issues associated with that. So it's a work in progress. The IT minister is working on it, and it's a matter of constant dialogue in the pink papers as well. So applicability should be existing and prospective consumers, and the type of information which is covered is of course sensitive in nature because everything is linked to your digital identity, right? Digital is real nowadays. What do you do with the data in the cache? Where does the data really lie, which is reflective of your actions, activities, right? So there's a notion in the social sciences, particularly in the digital social sciences, called as data doubles. So what we do in real life has a trace paper imprint onto some cache, onto some server, for example, which is lying somewhere, right? Maybe your search engine knows more about you. So and that's not a positive thing because somebody who's anonymous knows more about you than your family. So where do you actually store your data? What are the policy statements? What is the governance of the cybersecurity policy, data privacy policy? How do you actually do the training? Who is responsible for the governance? Is there a grievance redressal related to data security, which is very important? And what do you do with change management? What do you do when you change the policy? Does that go through a process? Does that have a procedure in place? How do you do a documented change management, which is really important, subject to consultation and subject to feedback loops? Next one. Employee health and safety policy is almost a dal roti, is very bread and butter, which is there with almost all the organizations, and it basically provides the operational construct or the conceptual construct to prevent work-related injuries and occupational health. So the governance and training is actually to sensitize personnel at all levels. So for specific work areas in your site, for example, work at height policies, for example, hot work policies, do you have the permit to work system over there? Do you what kind of monitoring there on site? For example, does a safety officer have to be there in case you're changing a light bulb somewhere? Or for example, you're doing some welding operation. So do you have a policy for firework, for example? Do you have a fire extinguisher in place? Do you have a trip hazard policy? So, so these are the various nuances of a health and safety policy which have to be fleshed out, which has to be detailed and well articulated throughout the making of the employee health and safety policy, which is of course a manual, but a policy has to be comprehensive and also broad enough to capture any emerging set of risks as well. And as any policy, the work in progress policy is a live open document. It has to be subject to feedback. So how do you actually do, how do you actually apply it throughout your supply chain? Whoever your vendor is, suppose electrician, suppose mechanical vendor or drilling vendor comes to your site, they have to sign up with their policy. They have to undergo induction training on your site. They have to have a permit to work system. They have to comply with EHS policies, which is often as basic as wearing a safety shoe with a steel toe, with a reflective jacket, and a hard hat, which is very basic, but which is often not done. But these things have to be taken care of in case you're dealing with informal vendors or even registered vendors on a facility. So how do you actually report this? You have an incident report chart. You do a root cause analysis of your accidents or incidents. You share these policies. You make sure that these learnings are input into your training programs, discussed very well, and also you take adequate technical support either from within the organization or through third-party consultants. Next one, please. Okay, we are in the era of net zero. Actually, India has recently formulated a net zero emissions policy of 2022, which was introduced in the Rajya Sabha in the winter session of Parliament on the 9th of December, which is a very interesting law. It sets out explicitly what to do with your what to do on a national scale with emissions, how to reduce your emissions, what kind of financial instruments will be available in terms of loss and damage, and in terms of emissions reduction towards net zero at the national level, right? So it is a part of an international, I guess. We are having almost a net zero policy or a law or a prospective legislation for the entire country. This is following with the recently passed act and not really a bill anymore. It was passed in the Lok Sabha recently, called the Energy Conservation Amendment Act of 2022, which actually mandates a creation of an internal pan-India voluntary carbon trading market, which is fascinating in nature. So, so drawing upon the same, I guess, the same ethos, the same kind of understanding, corporates have been doing some work on net zero as well, in line with the Science-Based Targets Initiative, in line with the 2017 Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures (TCFD), and a lot of work is happening on the net zero transition pathways initiative as well. So a company such as Unilever, for example, has been at the forefront of changing its entire business strategy, not only ESG integration, right? We started with the ESG integration at the beginning of the episode, but over here we are talking about an entire company which is transitioned its business model into something sustainable, into not only net zero, but they're talking of net positive. The former CEO of Unilever, Paul Polman, with Andrew Winston, who is a great sustainability writer, advocate, and academic, has written a beautiful book called Net Positive. The term net positive comes from the book. So, so they detail and articulate that journey, which is excellent case study upon the net positive climate transition of Unilever itself, where purpose drives profit and not the other way around. So, in the same spirit, Unilever has a climate transition action plan, which is on the website. It has set out a net zero target, which is mapped around short term, medium term, and long term, which is very smart. They take external validation targets by SBTi, which is industry-wide body for which you have to sign up to the 1.5 degree plan, and then you have to report it, I guess, once in 5 years in terms of your progress. So Unilever's approaches to sustainability, of course, is wholehearted, holistic in nature, and it seeks to transform society, help society, and it tries to become net zero by 2039, which is much ambitious than a lot of countries which have thought about doing net positive by 2050. So there is a governance and board oversight issue to it. So the board of Unilever has a carbon neutral board, which drives the climate agenda in terms of country level and strategic partnerships, led by the chief supply chain officer, which is, as an FMCG company, supply chains are everything for Unilever. So how do you embed climate thinking and climate risk at every node of your supply chain, which is global, which is flat, which is networked? So how do you actually report your progress? Reporting progress is one of the important parts of the BRSR thought process as well. What are you actually doing regarding climate, regarding your social indicators, and how are you reporting it? So BRSR is the Indian version, and BRSR, by the way, is mapped to SASB, TCFD, GRI, and also CDP. So it is very globally integrated within a spectrum of frameworks, and very neatly and smartly done. So the report for the climate transition plan has to be approved by an annual general meeting for shareholder approval every 3 years, and it has to undergo third-party assurance as well. Next one, please. So Goldman Sachs is a behemoth investment bank, retail bank, really massive name on Wall Street, with the iconic bear over there, with the iconic bull rather. So Goldman Sachs exemplifies the animal spirit of capitalism and how to charge ahead in terms of growth and progress, in terms of the entire Western capitalism framework, which is changing. Jamie Dimon, for example, the CEO of Goldman Sachs, talks a lot about climate change and in terms of risk nowadays, which is no wonder articulated within the environmental policy of Goldman Sachs. And it talks about safeguards, it talks about climate risk, it talks about investing in businesses which are doing work in the climate sector, for example, investing in enterprises which drive climate innovation. It has a green operational investment budget, which brings clearer focus to initiatives, including green buildings and innovative green technologies, which is very smart, because as an investor, the low-hanging fruit is often allocating dedicated money to initiatives which need the money, and a lot of great innovative people are doing work. So why not just fund them? And they also have a carbon accounting methodology which is made public, and they have third-party verification as well, which includes scope 1, 2, and 3, including business travel emissions as well as water use, the water footprint, which is very, very impressive. Uh, Goldman Sachs has a sustainable finance group as a part of its governance structure, which reports directly to the office of the chairman and provides guidance to a variety of businesses, develops training, and engages with a variety of stakeholders, which help engage with environmental issues. Of course, reporting with governance is joined at the hip. So they report on the progress annually through the sustainability report and the environmental stewardship section of their website. Next one, please. Okay, what's the call to action? We have heard, read, seen, observed in the aftermath of Sharm el-Sheikh uh, about these various impressive businesses who are moving the needle towards the arc of justice, towards climate change. So what do Indian companies need to do in terms of walking the talk rather than only engaging in rhetoric? So one of the simple ways of starting any green governance or the social conversation is to do benchmarking. If you're new to BRSR reporting, you may wish to examine the issues which your peers are focusing on in terms of reporting and disclosures, right? In terms of if you're a pharma company, have a look at what 8 other pharma companies which have done voluntary BRSR over the last 2 years have engaged in. What are their key areas of materiality, for example, which they have engaged in, right from Cipla to everybody else who have done it. It's very, very important that there is benchmarking done in terms of an understanding of how things are carried out. In terms of who are your material stakeholders, have you done a stakeholder engagement mapping of a power interest grid? Have you drawn out a power interest grid in order to figure out whom you would like to influence through your ESG policy, as well as who would be a sponsor, promoter of your climate policies as well. So this is very, very important. You do the benchmarking, then you do a stakeholder engagement plan, and you do a materiality assessment report, right? Which is a start of thinking about risk and opportunities as far as risk and disclosure-based reporting is concerned, right? So how do you do a materiality assessment? How do you define what is materiality for you, for your organization, in terms of whom are you trying to influence, whom are you trying to report to, whom are you trying to convince? And so it's a very important part of a materiality assessment in terms of, if you want to think about BRSR, you have to start off with thinking about your materiality map or your materiality mix as a whole. Think about what's your governance regarding ESG, right? Do you have an ESG committee on your board? Do you have an executive task force which talks to these kind of material issues on the ground, right from the board to the shop floor? Do you have ESG task force in place which would actually implement these kind of thought processes and engagement and ideas, right? And ultimately, ESG is a board issue. The world is changing towards climate zeitgeist. We need to move towards it as well. And when we start off by doing a materiality assessment, we have to also start thinking about how do we actually integrate it into your business strategy rather than it being a peripheral issue only for reporting purposes, right? Because reporting itself will not lead to resilience. When you integrate ESG into your thought process as consciousness in terms of material issues, then only it moves the needle over the long term, as Unilever has done, or Patagonia, or many other companies who have made SDG uh, sustainable development goals as the North Star of your business. So what are you doing about it? What's your thought process? What is the sector you're operating in? What is the social impact that you want to create at the end of the day? If you are a cement company, for example, you are directly contributing towards building the nation. You're building, it's a key input in terms of creating infrastructure, in creating roads, in creating businesses. But also cements is a very important emitter of carbon emissions. It's one of the most carbon intensive industries in the world. So how do you do a benchmarking? How do you do a technology assessment? How do you make sure that your emissions reduction roadmap has a sense and a plan in place, keeping into account that you have a social footprint as well, and not to discount your contribution towards building the nation. So it's both the risk and a very glorious opportunity too. So three important questions to round up on the episode today and the conversation. And thank you so much for your attention. So, what are the focus areas for your business according to your materiality assessment, stakeholder engagement map? Point number two: what is the company doing in those areas? So, how do you measure? What do you measure? Because what you measure is what you manage. So do you have a strategy in place? Is your strategy operationalized into targets, into key performance indicators? And last but not the least, what oversight has your company in place so that you manage to stay on track and committed to your ESG, climate, and BRSR goals, which is AKA in terms of compliance. So the best report is not the longest one, but the one which demonstrates focus and understanding of these issues. So thank you so much for your attention. Right now, there will be a small pop-up poll uh, uh, for the participants, and I would encourage you to please populate it. And we would be happy to answer any specific probe. Please raise your hand up, pop in your question in the live chat box, and we can have a small conversation. Thank you.
Attendees can now post their questions in the live chat box or raise their hands or write to us at esg@dodaco.com.
We can actually minimize the slide. Hi friends, would be happy to ask any particular question. Please do raise your hand or pop in the question in the chat box. We'll be happy to answer that. Hi friends. Well, I understand it's a Friday late afternoon in India, and there are more important things to do on a Christmas Eve weekend. But would love to hear any thoughts if you have some. If if there are no further questions, we would encourage the participants to join us in the next webinar, which is next Friday, and also writing to us at esg lothaco.com. We will be more than happy to answer any particular probes or clarifications on the same, and love to hear from you on any topic and engage with you as well. I can see one particular question in the live chat. Uh, Thank you for integrating the way forward on integrating the RSR. So is it a comment or a particular question, Madam Namrata?
Hi. Yes, it is a comment actually.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you so much. If you have any particular question, we would be happy to answer them.
So I would like to understand more on undertaking the materiality assessment, but maybe that may not be part of this particular conversation. But in general, while undertaking materiality mapping, what are the important aspects which any company should be looking at?
Yeah, materiality policy is very important as far as the mandatory policies are concerned. So we would be happy to speak about materiality, although we have a planned session on materiality sometime in January as well. We would welcome you to also join us on an exclusive session on materiality itself. So as far as starting point of doing materiality is concerned, uh, an organization first of all has to look at uh, its strengths and weaknesses, its uh, what is important from an environmental and social perspective as far as its business operations are concerned. So when we are talking about business operation, what is important, what is critical for its business continuity in terms of drawing out a materiality map, a materiality index from low to high, on a scale from low to high, and also make sure that what is considered material is also mapped to targets and plans. So a very productive starting point would be to hold a workshop with the senior management as well as your line managers and actually start asking them the question, uh, what is critical for you from an environmental and social standpoint? And that itself can be an opening into a thought process of what is considered important for you as an organization. And we can of course speak more on an offline conversation, or maybe take it forward to a webinar length event as well. Thank you so much.
Yes, definitely. Would love to know more about this, and of course, maybe we can connect offline, or the webinar would be definitely helpful.
Absolutely. You can definitely write into us at esg@lodhaco.com, and we can certainly have a call on the
Sure.
same. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. I would invite any thoughts, comment, provocations from the participants. Well, Simone, do you have any thoughts in order to conclude? We can then begin wrapping up.
Thank you, sir, for your insights on the various policies under the BRSR, the net zero policy, and the best practices to be undertaken for ESG integration. Also, thank you everyone for giving us your time, and we look forward to keep the ESG conversation going in our next episode, which is to be held on 30th December, Friday. Attendees are also requested to take the feedback survey after the webinar session.
Many thanks for your time, all of you, and wish you all a very Merry Christmas.